Hey, thank you, Steve. Good evening to everyone. What a great morning we had this morning. We had several more of our folks that felt a little bit more comfortable coming back to be with us, and it was good to see them. And in my case, good to meet some of them face to face finally. But we are getting more and more back, and we appreciate that, and hope that more will feel comfortable soon and be able to be back with us soon as we continue to expand in our activities and expand in our ministry. We started Bible school in Sunday mornings back today, and so it's been a great day. And as Jay said, it's been a good day, good little wet afternoon, but great day. And we're glad that you're with us tonight. Last week we finished up a study in First Peter, and tonight I want to just ask you a question as we begin our lesson tonight. How do you live your life? It may sound like a somewhat of a strange question, but I want you to think about that one idea. How do you live your life? We go through life and we pick and choose. We pick and choose our thoughts. We pick and choose our attitudes. We pick and choose our actions. Sometimes we react, but still the truth of the matter is we still pick those actions that we take even when we react. So we pick and choose as we go through life. We're constantly making choices, whether we're with regards to attitude, happy, sad, like, don't like, love, just feel comfortable with. We pick our thoughts. What are we thinking about? And of course, Paul reminded us in Philippians chapter 4 what kind of should be the parameter of our thinking. We pick our actions. Am I going to do this? Am I not going to do that? Am I going to do this over here? Am I going to do that over there? I want you, in thinking about that tonight, I want you to look at some thoughts. They are vague or we shouldn't say vague. They're varied is the word I'm looking for. They're varied thoughts along a lesson that's simply entitled Rules for Life. Here's some of the things that I think are biblical. But here are some of the things that I try to be mindful of and try in many ways to practice. And so I just wanted tonight to share those things with you, since we pick our actions and we pick our attitudes and we pick our thoughts. Here's some things that I try to have in my life, and like I say, I think are biblical, and hopefully you can gain some thought and some insight into them. The first thing that I want to share with you this evening is that I try to laugh instead of cry. Laughter is good for the soul. That's what Solomon said in a couple of places. In Proverbs 15, verse 22, he says, or 17, verse 22, he says, a merry heart does good like medicine, but a broken spirit dries the bones. He also said that a merry heart makes a cheerful countenance in Proverbs 15 and verse 13. Laughter is good. It's good for our health. There are health benefits in laughter. It strengthens our immune system, according to doctors. It boosts our mood. It diminishes our pain. It protects us from the effects of stress. It lightens our load. It keeps the immune system relaxed. It keeps the immune system built up. It releases endorphins, which are the feel-good chemicals within our bodies. Laughter protects the heart. Laughter actually burns calories. It's not a huge calorie burner, but it does burn calories. It lightens the angry load that we sometimes feel. It helps us live longer. And so doctors, when you begin to look all this up, they say, here's the benefits of laughing. Laughter is good. Laughter makes a sour day taste better, doesn't it? Laughter makes us just feel easier. It makes us go through the day. It makes the day a little bit brighter. While crying, and you might say, now, preacher, there is a place for crying. Well, Solomon said that in Ecclesiastes 3. He says there's a time to laugh, there's a time to mourn, there's a time to weep. And there he is. And so we understand that. We understand that crying can cleanse the soul as it releases the the bent up feelings that we have within us. But laughter makes us better. Laughter makes the day go by easier. Laughter makes the situation a little bit easier to swallow. It is, as one individual wrote years ago, it makes life more palatable. It makes it where you can enjoy it just a little bit better. And so we choose the attitude. And the attitude we really should choose is to rejoice, as Paul wrote in Philippians, and be happy. You know, we often think about the book of Philippians being a happy book. That Paul, on several occasions, used the word joy or rejoice and tells us to rejoice, to be happy. Well, the reason being is because Paul understood the benefits of laughter. And I think one of the rules for life needs to be laugh instead of cry. It was said of Abraham Lincoln. It was in the middle of the Civil War, and Abraham Lincoln was asked why he joked and told so many tall tales, as was seemingly his custom. And he simply said, "Were it not for the occasional vent, I would die. I must laugh to keep from crying." How true that is. How true it is that even in laughter the heart may pain, but the end of joy may be grief. And so we must understand that life well lived is a life that learns even in the midst and even in the face of difficult situations, even in times in which maybe we don't want to laugh, that we learn to laugh instead of cry. But a second rule for life is to thank the Lord for being above ground. Usually, most mornings, as I hit the snooze button, after I've hit it so many times, I know that I have a period of time, and I usually start with prayer. And the first thing that I do in that prayer is I thank God for the night's rest, but for the ability to see the dawning of a new day. To be, as someone said here recently in my presence, and to paraphrase it a little bit, it's always good to open your eyes and to see that you're above ground. How true it is. Life really is a blessing, isn't it? In Acts chapter 17 and verse 25, Paul on Mars Hill, in talking about God, says, "Nor is he worshipped with man's hands as though he needed anything, seeing he gives to all life and breath and all things." We see also in 1 Samuel chapter 2 and verse 6, after Hannah, remember Hannah had difficulty having a son, but God promised a son to her. And of course, Hannah said, "I'll give him back to you, God." Hannah in 1 Samuel chapter 2 gives a prayer, the first 10 verses there, of thanksgiving. And in that prayer of thanksgiving, about the last third of it, in verse 6, she says, "For the Lord kills and makes alive. He brings down to the grave and brings up." You see, she was even cognizant of the idea that the Lord makes alive. Life, then, is a blessing that God gave to mankind. And as we're able to live, we're blessed with life itself. And you might say, yeah, but that's where all the problems then kick in. You know, once you wake up in the morning, you thank God for the night's rest and to be able to see the dawning of a new day. Then all of a sudden you take your feet, you put them outside the covers onto the floor, and then your day begins and all your trouble begins. Yeah, but you remember you're going to laugh instead of crying. But you're going to be thankful that you're alive. Death's real, isn't it? It's appointed to men once to die, Hebrews chapter 9 and verse 27, and after that, the judgment. You and I can't get around it. You and I can't miss it. You and I will not be able to put it off forever. Oh, we may put it off for a while, but eventually we'll pass from this world. eventually we'll take our last breath. Each day that we are able to be above ground, each day that we're able to take a breath, though, gives us opportunity. An opportunity to serve our God, an opportunity to serve our fellow man, an opportunity to make right any wrongs that may be in our life, an opportunity to share with others, an opportunity to love, an opportunity to care, an opportunity. And so we need to be mindful to take advantage of those opportunities. But in taking advantage of those opportunities, you need to learn to live life by being thankful to God for being above ground. A third rule for life: make someone's day. Seek each day to make someone's day. You know, we live, I think maybe more so in a time than ever, in which we are all so focused upon self. Now, let's be honest. The idea of selfishness and the idea of being focused solely upon self is not new. We go back and we can see selfish examples and selfish lives in the Old Testament. We can go back to Cain, in the story of Cain and Abel, and we see selfishness in Cain because his offering was not blessed like Abel's was. And so we see selfishness all the way back to almost the beginning of time. But we live in a time in which we seemingly have blinders on more so than others, in which the thought is, I deserve everything that comes my way that is good. And what is good that doesn't come my way, I deserve it and I should have it, is the thought. And so we center upon self. But let me encourage you to look outside yourself, to remove the blinders, if you will, from off of the sides of your eyes, to get away from the idea of individualism, to not be afraid of what others may think, and begin to focus upon others. You know, Paul wrote to Timothy in 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 18, he says, let them do good that they may be rich in good works, ready to give, willing to share. We need to be folks that are willing to share. And we do that by making someone's day. Paul commended Stephanas and Photychus. And you know the reason why? He said, because they refresh my spirits. They refresh my spirit. They've made my day. Now, how do we go about making people's day? Well, we can do it, through a lot of ways. We can do it through a phone call. We can do it through sending a present to someone. We can do it through sending a card to someone. We can do it through a phone call, or we can do it through a visit. We can do it through an act of kindness. We can do it from the standpoint of just stopping and considering them. And in some ways, you might say we can even make a person's day and they'll never know it, but we've prayed for them. Now, I thoroughly believe that if you pray for somebody, really you ought to tell them. I receive a lot of encouragement when folks come up to me and say, I want you to know, Brother Paul, I prayed for you this week. Man, I feel on top of the world when they tell me that. You know why? Number one, because I know they cared. Number two, because I know that God heard that prayer and God answers prayers. And so whatever you may do, just go about when you wake up every morning and say, I'm going to make somebody's day. It may be a senior member of our community. It may be a small child. just go about and try to make someone's day. But then another rule to live by is help, don't hinder. Sometimes we do get in the way, don't we? I think back, when I think along these lines, I think back as a small child and helping my father with maybe some little task around the house. How that sometimes I really was in the way more than I was a help, even though I was trying to be a help. You know, sometimes you get this idea, just get out of the way and let me do it. Several years ago, I was talking to a mother, and she was talking about her teenage children and how that they didn't help around the house. And so as we were talking, and I was asking questions, I finally got to the root cause. She said, well, it takes so long for them to do it, and sometimes I just don't have the time and don't have the patience, and I just simply say, get out of the way and I'll do it. And I tried to explain to her that therein may be the problem that she's having to deal with. You're trying to do everything, but you want them to do it and expect them to do it the way you have and for as long as you have, and you've got a whole lot more practice than they do. I don't know that she necessarily took my advice, but I hope she did. So we sometimes naturally hinder folks and hinder the process. But yet at the same time, too, we need to learn sometimes we just need to get out of the way. Sometimes we just need to simply put, step aside and get out of the way. But at other times, we're in there with all we can, and what we must do is the best that we can. Now, those that we're working with, those that we're helping, need to be patient of heart and mind and soul, and they need to sort of take a breath and just let us catch up with them from time to time. But also, I need to learn. Get in there. Get to going. Don't stop people. Don't hinder them. Help them move forward. Help them to feel a little bit better about themselves and the situation, but help them, don't hinder them. You know, Lee Iacocca was said to have said one time that you either need to lead, follow, or get out of the way. So you lead or you follow, or you, in other words, you don't hinder, you help. Well, we ask ourselves, how do we hinder people? We might hinder people, or we might hinder situations by bitterness, by just simply being against everything and anything. Story is told of a man that was in a congregation, and this congregation had men's business meetings, and so every so often, periodically, they would meet together, and anytime anything came up, he was against it. It didn't matter what took place, he was against it. One particular Sunday, the men of the congregation got together for a men's business meeting, and he was late. The constant naysayer was late. And as he walked in, he said, I'm sorry, I'm late. I don't know what you're talking about, but I'm against it. Well, you know, there are folks that are like that. They're bitter. They're constantly a critic. They're constantly pessimistic. In other words, no, we can't do this. No, we can't accomplish that. That's not for us. That's not with us. That's not what we can do. We began this morning in the auditorium class to study the book of Nehemiah. And as we get on into it, and Nehemiah and the people rebuilding the walls, there's going to be three folks, Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem. And they are going to try to hinder the building or the rebuilding of the walls around Jerusalem. You see, they didn't want it to happen. And so consequently, they tried to stand in its way. Haman was the same in the book of Esther. Haman tried to stand in the way of progress for the children of Israel. And Haman, if you recall the story, was hung on his own gallows. Satan gets in there and Satan hinders. And so while it is true that folks hinder us and that at times events hinder us, we need to be sure that we're not individuals that are holding up the process, that we are aiding ever how we may. And let's be mindful that sometimes it's the behind the scenes, the fellow that is not an active participant, but the individual that helps. I shared with you the story of a preacher that was preaching on ministry within the congregation and serving and being a servant. And one lady called the preacher to her house the next day, and she told him, she said, you know, I'm stuck to this house. I don't drive. I can't see well. I can't, because of my arthritis, I can't get up and get out. I don't get to church the biggest portion of the time. She said, oh, I can't do anything, but I can pray. And so on a weekly basis, he got her a list, whether he carried it by her house or sent it through the mail or some other way. And there she prayed for the people on that list every day for that week. Well, she did not hinder the process either. She helped. That's what we need to learn to do. Help, don't hinder. Another rule for life: always have God first in whatever you do. God should be our great priority, not our if it fits my need priority. You know, that's the way some people feel about God. That God is a priority until something else comes up. Until, you know, well, I've got this going on, or I've got that going on, or I've got this event or that event. And all of a sudden, God's not so important. And we let the immediate oftentimes overtake what is important. Folks won't come to church sometimes. Why? Because the immediate becomes the focus instead of God. Sometimes folks don't act the way they should act. Why? Because it's more convenient to act this way, or because we're afraid of what people are going to say. And so once again, the immediate overtakes the important. And yet the important is God. And God should be our great priority. He should be our great focus. With God as our focus, everything else then in our life falls into place. And so God then becomes the restrictor, if you want to call it that. God becomes the focus. God becomes the one that curbs our speech, our thinking, our attitude, our actions, so that we are as God would have us to be. We are God-focused and not God sometime focused, or God when it is convenient focused, but we are God-focused. Remember, Paul wrote in Colossians 3 and verse 1, if you then were risen with Christ, and as Christians we all were, but if you were risen with Christ, he says, seek those things that are above, where Christ is sitting at the right hand of God. Put God first in your life, no matter what. No matter what. The immediate does not overtake the important. What's going on does not overtake the important. The focus of life is upon God. We cannot lose our focus. The story is told years ago. On the shores of the Carolinas, there was a section of shore that was very dangerous. Ships would often crash into the rocks off the shore, and there were quite a few lives that were actually lost as ships would would hit the rocks and they would break into pieces, and folks in the rough surf, they would drown. And so there was a lighthouse that was built, and people would stay in that lighthouse, especially at night, and they'd watch. They'd watch for people to make sure that the passage that they were doing was safe. As time passed, many lives were saved because of these people and their actions and the actions of the lighthouse. Victims were often brought into the frame building, and they would be given a change of clothes and a blanket. And soon those who had been rescued began to reward the lighthouse and its workers. And so donations began to come in. And the old frame house that was built, sort of as a lighthouse, was replaced with a newer and nicer and larger facility. Carpet was put in, nice furniture replaced kind of the old dilapidated pieces that they had. A new shower stall was built outside so that the people who were being saved could shower before going into the new lighthouse. Well, as notoriety and as news began to spread, these people began to hire folks to rescue the folks that were being in peril at night. They didn't forget the original mission altogether. They just sort of became more centered upon the plush air conditioner the lighthouse had and the surroundings that they had, instead of the mission of saving people. Well, that happens, doesn't it? Because it became more of a social gathering place than a place of rescue. We need to be sure that we don't lose our focus. And our focus needs to always be God. And so how do you live your life? Always have God first in whatever you do. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. And all these things, what are these things? Well, if you go back in Matthew 6, these things basically are health, life, strength, food, clothing. These things will be added unto you. And so that leads us to the next rule of life, and that's trusting God. And trusting God no matter what. Have faith in God. David reminds us in 2 Samuel 22 and verse 31, as for God, his way is perfect. The word of the Lord is proven. He's a shield to all those that trust in God. Now, there's a difference between having faith and having faith in God. One can have faith, but faith in God is one that has faith and has placed it in the one that they need to place it in. I think I shared with you a story not long ago, but it truly does fit here again. And it illustrates the point that I'm trying to make. One Friday, I was called by a funeral director who was a friend of mine. And he said, Paul, what are you doing tomorrow? And I said, well, it's Saturday. I'm off, He said, are you going to be in town? And I said, oh, yes, I'm going to be in town. He said, there's nothing going on at church, is there? And I said, well, no. And he said, could you do a funeral in the morning about 10 o'clock? He said, I would. They don't have anyone. I would, but I'm going to be out of town. And so if you'd do that, I would appreciate it. It would be a big favor to me, and I'll take care of you. And I said, oh, yeah, I'll be glad to do it, thinking that it would be a good opportunity to meet a family, invite them to church, and make new friends. And so I showed up. It was a very nice family. I asked the daughter of the man that was deceased if I could speak to her for a few minutes to try to get an insight into him. And she obliged me with a short conversation. And she told me this. She said, Preacher, I believe that my father had faith. He never did do anything about it. She said, my life, and this was a lady that was grown and had children, and I think was expecting a grandchild. So, this was a lady of age. So this man was of age. She said, in all my life, I never once saw him open a Bible. I never once know of him going to church. I never once ever saw him offer a prayer, even before a meal. But she said he had faith. Well, yeah, he probably did, but he must have had faith in himself and not in God. Faith in God allows us to turn our problems over to God. Faith in God allows us to let God direct us, allows us to let God lead us. Trust in the Lord, the psalmist reminds us, and do good. Dwell in the land and feed on his faithfulness. That's Psalms 37:3. And verse 5 of that psalm says, commit your way to the Lord, trust also in him, and he shall bring it to pass. Now, what's interesting is the context there. The context there in Psalm 37 is the idea of trust in the Lord, even in the midst of your enemies. And so the psalmist says in the 2 verses that we read, he'll take care of you. He's faithful. And then he says in verse 5 that he'll bring whatever it is that's going on in your life to pass. But you got to trust him. No matter what, it's challenging in this difficult time as it is. But we need to learn to trust in God. Paul trusted in God when we read in 2 Corinthians 11th chapter, where he talks about all the things that he'd been through, the shipwrecks, the beatings, the stonings, the imprisonments. And then you keep reading in the 12th chapter, he talks about his thorn in the flesh. And yet, where's he going to get that solved? He's praying to God. Now, God tells him no with regards to that thorn in the flesh. But he's still trusting God and wants God to help him in the midst of his troubles. Jonah would be another one. Jonah ran away from God, but when Jonah was swallowed up, Jonah repented. He came running back to God, according to Jonah chapter 3. Jeremiah was another one. Jeremiah was teased. Jeremiah was belittled. Jeremiah was ridiculed. Jeremiah was thrown into a cistern. And yet Jeremiah trusted in God. On and on we could go. Ezra is another one that trusted in God, and others that trusted in God. And we need to learn to trust in God no matter what. Let me give you one more rule, and I'll give it to you quickly. It's every black cloud has a silver lining. It's all in how you look at it, isn't it? And how you look at life. We can look at events and we can see it one way, and someone else may see it differently. I was talking to a young lady yesterday. She came by the house, a neighbor actually. Met her for the first time. Very sweet young lady. As I was talking to her, she was talking about, as I invited her to church, she told me that she went where she went to church, and she told me that she went with her mother, and she said it was kind of interesting to walk out of church so many times and to be talking to her mother about the sermon that the preacher had preached. And she made the statement, she said, I don't know where she was. She didn't get the same thing out of the lesson that I did. Well, she got what she got, and you got what you got. We all look at things differently, and we all look at them through different colored glasses and through different prisms of our own lives. But we're reminded that the Lord God is on our side. And being on our side, the psalmist reminds us in Psalm 119, verse 165, great peace have those who love the law, and nothing causes them to stumble. It's the mercy of the Lord, the psalmist wrote in Psalm 103, verse 17, that's from everlasting to everlasting, and on those that fear him, and his righteousness to his children's children. in the dark clouds of life, in the difficult times, in the difficult ways, something good's going to come out of it. God's working on you, if you will. No discipline for the present time seems to be joyous but grievous, but nevertheless afterwards it yields the peaceable fruits of righteousness, the Hebrew writer wrote in Hebrews chapter 12. We may not like the dark clouds, but in the dark clouds literally is rain, right? And what does rain do? It replenishes the earth. In the dark clouds of our life, there's silver linings. If we'll look for them, we can find them, because our God has promised to work all things together for good. How do you live your life then? What's some rules to live by? Let's run over them very quickly in case you missed one, if you decided to write them down. Laugh instead of cry. Thank the Lord for being above ground. Make someone's day. Help, do not hinder. Always have God first in whatever you do. Trust in God no matter what. And every day, or every black cloud, has a silver lining. Hope maybe these things will help you make your day and make them a little bit brighter as we try to live our life the very best we know how in accordance to the will of God, so that in the end, we can all, as we talked about this morning, march through those pearly gates of heaven, hand in hand, arm in arm, blessed by God. Hope that you're thinking about that. I hope that you'll give it some thought. Hope you'll be with us Wednesday night. If you can't be with us in person, that you can be with us maybe through means of the telephone service, as we will continue our study of the great book of Hebrews. We'll study Hebrews, the 8th chapter especially. Be with us again next Sunday morning. We're going to talk about worship, and I hope that you can be with us then. Until next time, my prayer is that you'll have a great day. God bless. We'll see you then.